Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're joining us today. We have quite a group gathered for this wonderful talk that Peter's going to share with us a little bit about trauma-informed and attachment-informed trauma. We'll be discussing that together. And it's always a delight to have Peter here, of course. We've had done several classes together now, so it's like a reunion every time we get together. So welcome, Peter. I'm so glad you're here. Hello,
Yeah,
hello.
yeah. Well, we meet again.
So we meet again, right? We got to stop meeting like this. So I wanted just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, trauma-informed and attachment-informed work, as well as really looking at attachment patterning, but also mainly how the body stores trauma and how Peter's going to show some very quick little clips on some examples of how he works with the body and to help relieve symptoms of complex trauma. Is 5 little clips that we're going to go through that you'll see different people working on a multitude of different avenues with different types of trauma that do manifest in the body and how to move that through. So I know I'm really excited to share this with you. It's really, really helpful. And then, of course, we're focusing on really talking about clinical tools to support your clients with complex trauma. So this is an exciting topic, an important topic. And I'll just say a little bit. Most of you know Peter Levine. You're very familiar with him. For those of you that might not be familiar, he created Somatic Experiencing, which is just a miracle blessing for removing trauma symptoms that's now taught and experienced and worked with around the world. It's a neurobiological and organic approach to healing trauma. He's been working with this for over 50 years. He, of course, founded Somatic Experiencing Training Institute and the Human Enrichment Foundation, and he's the founder and president of Ergos Institute of Somatic Education. So trained over 50,000 therapists in over 45 countries. That's really awesome. He has all sorts of lifetime awards. He holds doctorates in biophysics and psychology. He's the author of several best-selling books, including Waking the Tiger. That was the first one. I think I read like 3 or 4 or 5 versions of that as it was getting developed over the years. It was wonderful to be part of that. And it's now published in over 29 languages. He's a senior fellow and consultant at the Meadows Addiction and Trauma Treatment Center in Wickenburg, Arizona, and continues to teach trauma healing workshops internationally, online and in person, and all sorts of opportunities. So welcome, Peter. We're so excited that you're here and to have this conversation about such an important topic.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of, most of you are familiar with me as well, but if I just to let you know, I developed the dynamic attachment repatterning experience called the DARE training or somatic trauma training. And we're just really looking at providing folks, people, therapists, everybody, relevant skills and practical exercises that facilitate healing from attachment and trauma. We feel like everybody walking around the planet, this can be helpful at just like working with trauma in general. And we have different programs obviously available online and all sorts of ways to access different parts of supporting a healing journey towards creating more intimacy, wholeness, better relationships. I feel like we deserve deeper love and more connection in our lives. And yeah, I'm excited to be here as well. And we're jumping into our conversation today. So there's lots we want to cover and lots of questions have been coming in even before the talk today that we'll be addressing in the last 30 minutes of our time together today. The first 45 minutes or so, Peter and I will be looking at some of these topics, talking about them, and also mainly showing you the videos. I want to put us in touch with those pretty quickly. But Peter, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And I know we've talked about this together several times, but we might start our conversation a little bit with why developmental trauma is so relevant to complex trauma and how attachment injury can be a part of what's underneath some of the complex traumas that people are dealing with later as adults.
Yeah. While you were talking, I had the following image because where I am right now, I'm just very close to the ocean, actually, right out my window. I see the ocean. But if I imagine myself sitting, on the beach or above looking down, you see the oh gosh, what's it called? The foam, from the ocean, the way when the wave breaks, then underneath that are the waves themselves, and underneath the waves are the tides. And the tides you don't see unless you really know what you're looking for. But the tides really are where the great majority of the energy is stored. And so I think I see attachment issues as foundations, solid foundations, or the opposite, and that where we have a weakness and the foundation is distorted and somehow, and then we build the house on that foundation. And the house is always a little bit off, and you try to fix the house here up on the second
On
floor,
the top, right?
on the top, and it looks like you're fixing it, but you're really not, because the weakness, the structural weakness, comes from the very foundation. And I think that's one way to think about attachment and attachment trauma, is it really is what gives us that basic sense of how we are in the world.
And especially how it shows up in relationships. So often with unresolved trauma, it really affects our ability to connect to ourselves, to connect to another person authentically, to connect to the ground. You're going to be showing us the frog feet exercise of grounding. Just there's so many ways we lose contact with life and nature and God or source or whatever, that it's such an important piece to be aware of and to be addressing, as along with the actual trauma that someone might be facing.
And in some ways, I'm of two minds here. It's sort of like, it's a little bit less now, but it used to be every week or two, you'd get an announcement in your mailbox about some training or some workshop on attachment. And, I was just out of curiosity, I watched one of them, and I was surprised at how weak it was. And I think the missing part was what's going on in the body. You briefly mentioned it, really, how this foundation plays out in our body, in our interoceptive experience, in our
absolutely
awareness. Yeah.
Well, I know that having a sort of an attachment informed and an SE informed and a body informed way of working with someone is really critical to get to these very subtle patterns that can really make a big difference when we're trying to heal from trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's really right on the mark here, that we really need these pieces, which are often missing in attachment theory or in attachment therapy. How we really find our way to connect with those inner tides, those waves and the inner tides, and move. It's not even moving through. It's really first embracing them and appreciating how it's affecting our relationships. Usually when it comes to our awareness, it's because they're adversely affecting. But then we get some kind of a choice. We can really look at our relationships and look at our relationships in a different way, of what each of us, not just our attachments, but all of our trauma, meets the other person who has all of their trauma. And you put that together and it's going to be a disaster. Do I have?
You're definitely going to marry your unfinished business, right?
Yeah, right. Oh, that's good. That's a good one. I would just give an example of this. Many years ago, must have been 30 years ago. One of my students was a marriage family therapist and was seeing this couple, and she just couldn't get anywhere with them. They would just, bare their teeth at each other or just collapse. So when they came in, they sat on the couch, and one on one end and one on completely on the other side, as separated as they could be. But I noticed something interesting. They both had a scar across their throat. And I thought, maybe did they both have thyroid operation or something like that? So anyhow, when I started to work with them and with their experience in their body, the following images came up and following pretty horrific sensations. They were driving, they had a VW bus. They were driving somewhere in Southern California. And there was a hitchhiker. And so they stopped and they let him in. Well, after a short period of time, he took out this enormous knife and cut both of their throats. I mean, if you can believe that.
Mm.
Thankfully, they were very close to a hospital and their lives were saved. But you can say, how in the world could they ever get close without working with this and appreciating each other's pain, their primal pain, and bringing that into the present day attachment pattern? And again, I think that's one of the things that's often missing in attachment therapy, is that it's not really brought into the here and now. I mean, because that's why you, in my opinion, why you do therapy anyhow, to live more fully, to be
Right.
more connected to self and to others.
Well, that's something we emphasize in the attachment work, that we do so much body focus and relational energy going between two people, and really learning how to work with that. I think you're right. It's sort of a match made in heaven between the body awareness and processing physiologically as well as relationally. Such an important focus. I agree.
That's right. Yeah. And again, those are the tides that really are where our deep energies are stored. Our deep aliveness is stored, waiting to be accessed.
And that the healing does happen in the present. We're pulling reactions or patterns from the past, but processing them in the present. And that's the way we create the healing, not by going back into history and staying there, but to bringing it forward into working with those patterns or reactions in the present moment.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we do something like that. You know, Freud talked about regression in the service of the ego. I'm not sure what he actually meant, but I think the question is it useful? Does it really help the person heal? Does it help them change some of their maladaptive patterns? And so that's in service of the self. I wouldn't say in service of the ego, but in service of the self with a big S.
Well, I think one of the things you're going to be showing in the clips, which we're going to show very, very soon, is how to work with some of the understandable biological defensive responses that come up when there's threat is present. And I know one you're going to show today is working with the flight response. So just how to help that body organize it and move it and evoke it and feel it in the moment, in the present, and then complete it, so that the body can move past that threat response that maybe didn't even get a chance to be activated in the first place. So that's, I think, a really foundational piece of somatic experiencing that you've created.
Right. And there are two things there. One is that you, oh gosh, what am I thinking? Anyhow, it'll come, I'm sure. Oh, yeah. So at first, we're working with the defense against threat and danger.
All right.
Then we use that as a defense against our feelings and our sensations. So we have to befriend our sensations enough so that they can inform us and we can work with them.
Yes. And I think let's go ahead and show the clips if you're ready to do that, because we were talking about it, but we can actually show it in action. And I'd like people to see what you're actually doing there.
That's the best way.
Antoinette.
I just want to run away. I don't want to be there where it feels that way. So I just want to run away
and escape. Well, can you imagine running to escape? Imagine your whole body, your legs, your arms, your shoulders, your head, running. And just running till you find a place where it feels safe enough for you to just settle. That's it. And just noticing how your forehead is tipped upward. It almost looks like you're looking out into the sun. You have any sense of that? The sun coming down on your forehead? Good. enjoy that. Just feel the sun, the warmth of the sun, the color of the sun. Yeah, really just let that warmth come into your body. And to really fill your body, fill yourself with the sun. When it,
I noticed that my breathing is not nearly as shallow, and that I'm able to, my throat doesn't feel so tight. And there's this occasional feeling of wanting to hide and run away again. And then I can think about people around me that are supporting me, and people I care about being there for me. And it makes me feel more protected and safe. And
right.
So Peter is going to unpack this a little bit. And one of the things that's so beautiful is to see this, the running defense response, and then the resourcing of the sun, and him really expanding the sensorium about that to really help her embody it.
Yeah. You know, and it's really kind of at the very end, I don't remember the exact words, but you really get that she understands that this, when she comes to that place where she feels safe enough, not safe, because, you know, if you just say that to the person, they'll say, I never feel safe. But really you're asking, okay, to find that place, wherever it is, in the meadow, by the ocean, in the forest, in a glen, where you feel safe enough. And when she feels that, then she starts to talk about her connection, both to herself and to other people in her life.
So there's an example of moving it into healthy attachment and being able to access people for support and comfort.
Right. And it's kind of interesting. It really appeared to come spontaneously. I think it did. And so again, like all of these inner stirrings, these inner connection hungers or desires, they really, once you connect what's going on in the body, they'll often just appear as if from, you know, from where did that come from? But I think that's from this part of us that is a collective, that we really know not just what happened to us, but some of these universal feelings and sensations, which again, you could see with, oh gosh, what was her name?
Antoinette.
Antoinette, right? That's a nice name. And so at the very beginning, you know, I noticed a slight change in her body reaction. And that's the key, because if I missed that, then we really wouldn't have the bridge to go from her present to her attachment potentials. So I'm always, you know, starting with something like that, something where you really get the feeling it's okay and it's safe enough, and I can connect with self and others. I guess I'm repeating that, but it bears repetition. And also when I notice something going on in the body, some little shift, maybe a teeny bit of trembling or a change in temperature or what looks like might be tingling, again, I just mention that, bring Antoinette's attention to that. And then I shut my mouth and I just wait and wait to see what develops. And that's the key. You know, let's say this about music. A good musician, it's not about the notes, but it's about the space between the notes. And I think this is very similar to that idea, that we make an intervention, but then we need to take the time to let it play out as it did. And again, it opened to a new experience. You mentioned as a resource of facing up and facing to the sun. And so I sort of added something there for her. But if it wasn't her experience, I'm pretty sure she would say, no, that's not my experience. But then I said, well, okay, if you are looking towards the sun, I should have said it with your eyes closed, feeling the warmth and letting the warmth come in and suffuse your whole body. And again, when you're feeling that warmth in yourself, you'll also be feeling and sharing that warmth with others who are likewise, oriented. So, so I think that that's the main learning from that vignette. You want to add something?
The other thing I wanted to add was she started the flight response, right? A defensive response to whatever threat she was dealing with. And then you brought in the sun. And as soon as she started to embody that or shift her awareness to what it was more of a resource state, she then said her breathing got changed. Her breathing got deeper. So you could see, and she actually reported and was aware of the autonomic nervous system starting to regulate around breath. And you didn't tell her to take a deep breath. You set up a condition where that regulation would happen organically and naturally.
Yeah, thank you. That's embarrassing. I didn't say that. Yes, it really is a window. The autonomic nervous system is that window into the deep self, the true self. It's physiological. It's a physiological response, but it's also a physiological response. It really takes us to get this internal, inner, visceral support, autonomic support, which is absolutely essential in connecting with ourselves and connecting with others. So thank you.
Allows us to resolve the trauma and reconnect.
Exactly. And when the trauma gets resolved, or you can watch it seemingly to get resolved, that's when positive attachment experiences come up, or
right.
being able to look in the future for how that warmth might play in the relationship with some other chosen person.
This is such a beautiful example. I think we're probably ready to go on to check in with Patrick and working with his very intensely contracted jaw with the VOO sound.
You willing to go on a little bit? Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, anytime you want to stop or rest, let me know. Okay. Because the whole idea is really for you to orchestrate it. I'm just like sort of a bystander. Okay. What we're going to do is start with that VOO sound, but I want to now have you engage your jaw. Okay? I'll show you what I mean, okay? So Ray is laughing because we've done that a number of times together. So again, the idea is to kind of get that feeling into your jaw and just opening it a little bit till you feel the resistance, and then letting it close a little bit, and then opening it, see if you can open it a little bit more to meet that resistance, and each time just going to the place. Okay? Good. And just notice. It may make you feel even more tired, maybe a little bit more like yawning.
One of the things is I grip my teeth a lot. And,
yeah, I know.
When I wake up in the morning, I feel like I can hardly open my mouth sometimes.
Yeah, that's why we're working on it. Because we're working at, because I want to always let you know what we're doing. That way, you know, you're better able to, we're able to work together. The first thing we did is we really worked with interrupting the sequence of physical sensations that in the past have led to panic. Now what we're doing is working with the opposite. The antithesis of anxiety is aggression, is power. Not power over, but feeling your own inner power. And so that's what we do when we're connecting the belly and the jaw, is really getting this sense of I'm here. and your own power.
Beautiful.
Okay. Yeah. So again, you just see, first of all, I'm pretty sure that he's military. He's very much a mesomorphic action structure. And so I have to be judicious in not doing something that makes it feel like, it's an airy-fairy. And
also that you're not taking over his choices.
Yeah.
You address that at the very beginning, just like this is really you, I'm just a bystander. You're really emphasizing his self-efficacy.
Exactly. And I say, it's important for you to know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So again, to engage together in a shared experience. And you can see his eyes lighten. He looks even more directly at me, but softly, but directly. And I'm pretty sure he has had panic reactions. I don't know what the full, the root of that did come up, I think, in the session. But so the guts, the visceral sense is really where we get our sense of being at home. I haven't quite said that like that before, but it is. It really is where our home is, where we live, where we desire to live, where our instincts lie, where our intuitions form. And the jaw, I worked with the jaw in part because his jaw was very, very tight.
Well, that's a favorite hiding place for a lot of unprocessed trauma.
Exactly. The jaw is, yep, no question about that. The jaw and the eyes. So I then, I assume that we did the VU before we come to this clip. But so to get him to connect his power, what I call a healthy aggression, not aggression, but healthy aggression, to be able to go and get what we need in life. Also, healthy aggression is, as I mentioned, is more or less an antidote for fear and panic. You can't be feeling aggression, healthy aggression, and panic at the same time. They're really mutually exclusive. So to practice that power and connection with the self, again, is also the beginning of the attachment, and it plays out. And you can see when he's looking at me, he really is opening. And I think for him, it's quite courageous to do this, because this is kind of out of his realm of normal experience, again, because he's very much action and not feeling, and comes from a military background. But I call it the 3-minute rule. If within 3 minutes you don't really engage the person, and feeling and sensation and relation, if you miss that 3 minutes, the session will just kind of wander, and maybe you'll finally get to something, but it's not really sharp. It's not precise. So that's really, really a key in working with all trauma, but especially with issues around attachment trauma, to really do something that the person gets it. The Ray video, which I guess you can link us to our website. It's a YouTube thing where I worked with this Marine who was blown up by 2 of these explosive devices. And just before that, his best friend died in his arms. And you really see at the very beginning, he says, I don't want for people to have to take care of me. And I say, well, yeah, you want your autonomy back. And he lights up. And that's true, I think, with virtually any session. Something's going to happen in those first few minutes. If you see it, if you respond to it, and with Antoinette, it was, what was going on is clearly in her body. But whatever it is, if you get to it and reflect it to the person, because that's another thing that people with attachment issues very often didn't get reflection from their caregivers, from their parents, looking at them and playing with them, falling in love with them. I love it when T. Barry Brazelton talks about the mother and the infant becoming in love with each other.
Yes.
Really a thing. And so we have to also risk that, allow that to be in ourselves. And so in a way, I hope you understand why I'm saying this, we need to something like falling in love with the client.
Yes, I don't think Sheldon Kopp used to say, if you can't love your client, you should refer them to someone else. You have to be able to really love your client.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Good. At least I'm on a lonely hillside here.
We don't use that word enough in therapy. I mean, we really are loving people back to health. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I think it's something that we tend to really avoid or negate, or just think it's inappropriate. I mean, of course, there are inappropriate things that can happen, but really, if we deeply care for the person and for their health, and when we meet their resistance, to say, hi, excuse me, and to really feel the resistance as a useful place to go. So it's really, really about creating this milieu of connection and caring.
And that's where the person that's facilitating the session hopefully has done some work on their own attachment history and their ability to connect and be authentic and show the kind of attunement you demonstrated, so that he actually can brighten up and engage and look at you. These are attachment signals that he's present and showing up. So valuable, really, really important.
Yeah.
I always think of it as like getting the green light to go to the next thing. When you see you've been able to have that 3 minute rule you have of the engagement, and then that gives you an opening to move forward.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share, or should we move on to John when he's working with his shame posture, moving in and out of the collapse response?
Sure. No, I mean, when we get to go over the whole sessions, or the bigger.
Yes, these are like trailer clips for what we're going to be showing in the course that you'll be seeing much more in depth. You'll see the whole session.
And again, how the session, because especially with somebody with his kind of background, I want to see what is it that he wants to change, what is it that's haunting him. And in this case, it was the panic attacks, and I believe there was a fairly specific reason for them occurring, but that was at a later in the session.
Yes. This is John with the shame posture.
Oh yeah. So let's go back and forth between here and here, but doing it slowly, like 1/20th. That's it. And then just slowly coming back down into, and then slowly coming up. Yeah. And what do you notice? What's the difference?
I feel more, I guess, present in my body.
More present.
In my body and within the room.
Because when you go into like this looks like somebody who's being beaten down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is the opposite. And the body can't register both at the same time. That's the good news.
Okay.
So if it's collapsed and shame and beaten down, that's in this posture. When you find your way, not just by going like this, because that won't do it, but you slowly come back up. That's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
so just to see how powerful it is to move in and out of that collapse reaction and start to unpack it by staying present to the sensation, staying present in the experience of the moving down and moving back slow enough that you can track the sensation. Beautiful example.
Yeah. And without that, Therapy could go on forever working with shame issues. And very often the therapist, because of their own shame issues, really doesn't want the client to go and into their shame issues. So they unconsciously or semi-consciously deflect the person from coming to the shame. But then the question is, how do you work with the shame? Now, when I was kind of realizing this and beginning to get a deeper understanding of that, I came across the work of a woman named Nina Bull, and she was this in the I think in the late 40s and earlier mid 50s. She was at Columbia University, and she developed what she called the attitude theory of emotion. And so basically, she trained people to be aware of their bodies enough. She trained an observer to observe the person who's the client, will say, for her to working clients. And then to just correlate these. So she would have the person imagine being angry or being fearful, being sad. She didn't do shame for some reason. But anyhow, if you're in one of these postures, because they're all postural sets, they're all attitudes, bodily attitudes. If the person is in one attitude, one emotional form, then they will only be able to feel that emotion until they come out of that and can then go into a different postural sense.
It's like locked into the body position.
Exactly. And, again, we want to watch the whole session, but it was pretty clear. By the way, I was doing some active work with vibra swings with the Smovies, but having him stand really helped him ground. And again, if you ask therapists, what percentage of your time do you work with a client where you're sitting in your chair and they're sitting in their chair?
They're more empowered when they're standing.
Yeah, and more empowered and more grounded. And it was kind of like, the question that I was asking didn't even make any sense. Yeah, of course you're sitting down. And you're sitting down for hour after hour after hour. So you are starting to collapse. And when you're standing, it's one of the reasons to use standing, you really can't collapse or you're going to fall down. You can't collapse. So it gives some upward dimensionality of the body. And it gives the place where he can come from and experiment with this posture that I'm seeing in his body. I've noticed it now several times. So I have my awareness, I have his awareness to that. And then this collapse is, pretty significant. So instead of just going like that, I have him do it first and then say, let's do it at 1/20th speed. 1/20th. And so he touches in and then comes back. So what we're doing here is that we're really having them learn to come into a difficult physiological state and to not get stuck there, to be able to touch it and to move out. And that wasn't, Nina Bull didn't look at that, but that was sort of what I was doing. And her observations really helped to support that. Anyhow.
That's really important to know. And the other thing that I think is relationally important is that you also kind of did it with him a little bit. So you're kind of doing it together. So the extremeness of the fear and shame, sometimes we can do the exercise with the person and they feel like that you're in it with them. There's a support to go in and out of it, and it helps it release even more.
Yes. In a way, it's like you're meeting them.
Yes.
Even though it's a very uncomfortable thing, I'm saying non-verbally, I'm saying, I'm here and I'm going to go with you and let's explore this together.
Even the more important that it's uncomfortable that you do it together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I don't always do that. I don't always go into the posture. But in this instance, I thought it was really important. And I think it was.
You can kind of assess the amount of support someone might benefit from.
Yeah.
The next person we have is Becky, and we're talking about shifting frog feet, which is a kind of funny thing to say, but we're really looking at grounding.
Oh.
And we'll start with that.
I feel my feet more on the stage or the solid bottoms.
Great. So that's maybe just focusing on that, how your feet are contacting the ground. Again, like the frog has these suction cups that really root it.
Yeah.
And maybe as you're just shifting your weight very slightly from side to side, see if you can get a sense of your feet that even opening more into the ground.
Yeah. Or I imagine frog feet too. Little suctions on the toes.
Yep, just really anchoring.
I would like to have more of a dark purple frog suit.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's it, really dropping into your feet, your legs. There. Now just noticing as you do that, how your spine lengthens. So an image that I often use is feeling the rooting to the ground, and as you feel that rooting, just noticing your head just kind of like an invisible string, just suggesting it to move upwards.
So mainly seeing, I think, the importance of grounding and the fact that the natural physiological response to elongation, which is another signal for resiliency.
And pride.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in a way, if I had to summarize the whole session, I would say she went from will, like from kind of a masochistic body, that she went there to really connect and lengthen. Again, because that's the opposite of being beaten down. And so they both have shame issues, but I was working with them in very different ways. And basically with any client, any client, every client is a new person. And I know that my job is to be there and to witness their unfolding and to support their unfolding. And again, at the end, to see her with pride, dignity and pride. Again, I'm not sure exactly what happened before that and what happens after that. But that part, I think, again, is a real, what's the word? Not a transition point, but really what you really are looking for.
A transformative element of it. And we'll be seeing the whole video in the class of all of these demos. So it will be more familiar with how things happen before and after. It'll be easy to see and track.
Yeah. Oh, and at one time, kind of about midway, a little bit more in the session, she shares something that about humor, something that's humorous.
The purple frog legs.
The purple frog legs, exactly. And so that's a way of her playing with me. And again, because play is so important in attachment.
That's a part of healthy attachment, right? Part of the ventral vagal social engagement. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at any mammals, especially at the babies, they're always playing. They're always kind of, their teeth might be bare, but they're not hurting each other generally. And again, this way of practicing playfulness and sharing playfulness is, again, part of the essential matrix of attachment.
Right. Well, the next clip, we're running a little bit tight on time here. The next clip, we're going to be talking about the arm squeeze with Vanessa, and just to show how to shift the internal constriction to help it release a little bit. I did want to mention, as you saw, just with Becky, that she's got these green things in her hands. Those are the vibrational tools you were talking about, and they're called Smovies. People were asking about what the Smovies were, and there's something that you use to help bring grounding and work with the body.
Well, exactly.
As a tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at Vanessa.
What would you like to have happen here? What would be your hope?
I'd really love to get rid of the crushing around my spine and the pain in my body.
Yeah, and you do it like this. You show it like it's like really crushing. Huh?
Crushing.
And that's been there as long as you can remember?
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Do you even remember the first time you became aware of it?
No.
Wow. So it's just as far back as you can remember.
Yeah.
And it's like this.
Yeah, it's crushing in my mostly my mid-thoracic here.
Mid-thoracic.
Yeah.
And I assume that you've had, workups, MRIs, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they can't find anything.
Well, I have a scoliosis, but
yeah, I can see that.
yeah, but yeah, it's just more my muscles, I think, contracting around my spine.
Well, look, let's just work a little bit with this. So, with your permission, I'm just going to offer you my wrists. And just take both of your hands, just like what you were doing here. And notice that your hands are like this. They're really in a fist.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move a little closer, okay? Okay, and then I'm going to give you my arm. And you just put all of the tension. And don't worry, if I need you to stop, I'll say stop.
Yeah.
But I want you to put all the tension in your spine onto here. So direct it onto here. So I can really feel what it's like to be in your spine. And notice your breathing. There we go.
You okay?
I'm fine. Even better. Really put that tension here. Something just happened just then. Something shifted. You feel a little bit trembling, a little shaking in on your lips, your arms. Yeah, so just feel the shaking. And take as much time as you need. Yeah, there's a lot of shaking now. It's building. Ooh. Ooh. Right. Wow. There's a lot of energy locked in there, huh? Yeah. Okay. It's starting to settle a little bit.
Yeah.
You can see your heartbeat is starting to go down a little bit.
Yeah.
We kind of went up there for a while, right? And now coming down.
Okay.
That's really important to know that your heart can do that. Right? It can accelerate, but then it can also settle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can take a long time if I get a shock. It can take
Right,
a
but
little
this
while.
time, no.
No.
It went
good.
up
Yeah.
and then came down. Really important.
Yeah.
Really important.
Just so beautiful to see how much that's authentic smile and how relieved she was at the end as you were teaching her how to move the stress out of her body into your arm, and that he could release and her heart rate could regulate.
Yeah. And boy, and her breathing really released. I mean, there was like almost zero breath at the beginning. just enough bare sustenance to exist. And her breathing really became strong. And then she started to shake and tremble, which I noticed, of course. And again, it's fairly subtle, at least at first, quite subtle. But then the shaking clearly led to a discharge. And so she was then able to discharge the heartbeat, which was accelerated, but then it would come and then come back down and settle. So she learned that her body knew what to do and could do it.
And that's so empowering that you really reinforced that her body knows how to do it. And also how much can happen in just a few moments of physiological shift and transformation. Absolutely fabulous.
Right. Well, again, that's the thing about somatic experiencing. It is a more of a bottom-up approach, but it's not just bottom-up. I mean, any kind of therapy has to have some of both.
Right.
But we really start, that's our base, is from bottom up. And then we meet the top down as a way of integrating the experience, about maybe having the possibility of finding new meanings. But we just take our time to do that. And all of this here really, again, it's that space between the notes. It's different in each session, but it's because of simply because it's different people and different characteristics and different needs and different interventions.
What's arising in the moment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a beautiful, very short clips. I think you showed some really powerful things. And of course, if people are interested in the course, we're going to tell you a little bit about that. That's coming up. And then we'll have our time with questions and answers at the end. We want to get to as many as we possibly can. The course is open now. It's called Working with Complex Trauma, Untangling Somatic Wounds. And the main thing we're really trying to get across in here is to learn somatic techniques and clinical skills that really you can bring into your practice. And of course, if you want deeper training, there's the somatic experiencing training that's also available. But we're going to get a really good in-depth sense of what this is, how powerful this way of working can be as you watch the demos and we debrief them and discuss them. First of all, just to give you an idea of what we're including, there's 5 live demo training sessions led by Dr. Levine that he's going to be debriefing in person in the live calls from demos that we've filmed earlier. And you've seen just a little bit of a trailer, a little bit of a clip of each of them already today. And then, of course, we'll have live interactive Q&A where you get your questions answered by us in each class. And you have many downloads, audio, transcripts, demos, and additional resources in the course that you have lifetime access and your own private learning portal, as long as you're alive and I'm alive. So you can continue learning and revisit the course material in a variety of learning formats. So there's just a lot of supplemental information. I want to also highlight some of the bonuses we're including in this course that will also help you in that direction. We're adding the basic principles of somatic experiencing workshop. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes. We'd love it if you decide to join the class. If you could take a look at that before we start, you'll get a lot more out of the demos. You'll understand them at a deeper level. And then I've also included some client demonstrations that are focusing on healing trauma, but also really working with the relational field as well. So these are some things you'll have immediately available to you when you sign up, if that's what you decide to do. Let's go to our next slide. First of all, let's take a look at the curriculum. What are we going to be covering in this course? Each class will be 90 minutes, starting at noon Mountain Standard Time on the schedule that we'll give you here. And they're interactive training sessions with Q&A with Peter and myself. You'll meet us again, to really take a look at the in-depth understanding of these different client circumstances and demonstrations. In the first session, February 1st, coming up soon, we're going to be really looking at honoring your younger self, like how to access those early patterns and to bring them into the present and work with them. In session 2, February 6th, really looking at untangling the panic sequence. This is so important for so many of our clients. And to, like Peter said today, looking at the antidote to that, which is empowerment and inner power and an ability to be in one's body authentically again. Session 3 is February 8th, overcoming long-term violence. This is so important for so many of our clients that either have served in the military or have domestic issues or different circumstances they've encountered. Many of us can relate to this topic for our clients. And session 4 on February 13th, we're moving towards the authentic self, really helping us move in this direction that helps us connect deeply to ourself, and then also be open and able to connect deeply with someone else's self in an intimate way. Session 5 is the early developmental connection to early pain. So this is something that I think is important in every session, but we're going to be particularly paying attention to that and focusing on that as well. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of information in terms of enrolling, there's different ways you can pay for the program. You can do a one-time payment for $267. The most you can also do $99 a month in 3 different months if that's easier for you. So you can decide which works best for you, and we're excited to have you join us, and that would be wonderful. We're going to have a wonderful group assembling to really look into these issues in depth. I hope to see as many of you as can manage it in the class, because it's always such a rich experience to be with Peter and also to debrief these sessions and to really take a look at what's most important and what we need to really be paying attention to in ourselves, in our own healing, and then also in the people that we're trying to help as well. It reduces a lot of unnecessary suffering, which is what I'm always really excited about. So I think we're going to transition into Q&A. There's lots of questions I know that people have had and have been waiting to get a little of input on, and we'll do as many as we can today. I'm going to look at my Q&A area here and take a look. We won't get to everybody, and we're going to maybe sometimes collapse into themes. We occasionally get this question, Peter, about that actually coming from Pete, how trauma and autism might be connected in different attachment issues. Do you have anything you'd like to say about folks on the spectrum?
Yeah, you know, I have to be careful because it's one of these really loaded subjects. Yeah, I just would say, maybe I say it a little bit differently. So I had a young man, I think he was in a workshop that Bessel and I did at Esalen, and he wanted to make an appointment with me. So he worked up in Silicon Valley. So he came in and he had his computer, and he would type things that I said or that he said. So that was the only way to communicate, was through, and he was out of the area. So I really didn't, I would see her maybe for 2 or 3 days once a year. And then after 2 or 3 years, he came in and he momentarily made eye contact. And then after that, it was almost like it was a different person that we were talking together. Then the next year, I get a picture, a postcard, what do you call it? A Christmas card. And he was actually with this really lovely woman, very pretty young woman. And they had a beautiful child together. And they have, pictures of them walking together. So what happened then? Well, to tell you the truth, part of me doesn't know. But part of me is that we just stayed bodily resonant to evoke some of his attachment potentials, to where he could then not just have to go through the computer, but could actually be in contact, and how then his life really changed and transformed. And I have to tell you, I was surprised when I got the postcard. I truly was surprised, but in one level I wasn't, because I knew something would happen. I just didn't know how it would play out. And some trauma issues did come up when we were working together, but I want to be careful not to say that trauma causes autism. But it's certainly one of the factors, I believe, that contributes to autism.
Thank you. Deanna wrote into us. She said she'd love to understand a little more about the connection to the jaw, throat, and hips with stored trauma, and how to access it safely to allow the expression.
Yes. So goes the jaw, so goes the pelvis. Let me say that one more time. So goes the jaw, so goes the pelvis. And again, the jaw is about, when somebody's in a shutdown state and they connect with their jaw, then it takes them out of the shutdown in a more active state. So physiologically, it has that function. It also is again being able to bite into life.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I do an exercise with somebody that's really locked in their jaw, and I'll say, sometimes I'll ask, does anybody have an apple in them?
Right, an apple.
Yeah. And sometimes, occasionally somebody does. I says, it's okay. We can imagine it. So I have this wonderful apple in my hand, and oh my gosh, it just smells delicious. Here, take the apple. Can you smell it? Oh yeah. And do you notice your mouth watering at all? Oh yeah, it's funny. It is. I say, okay, now just imagine bringing that apple towards your mouth, smelling it, feeling the saliva, opening your jaw,
Mm-hmm.
and bite into life. And that's really a lot of what that's about, really. Like, okay.
That's beautiful. Deanna had another question along with this one. She said, do you think it can be a connection to overeating or eating issues related to the tension in the jaw?
Well, certainly to trauma. And actually, I think more than anything, it's a disconnection from our viscera. So the person with eating disorders is not getting useful feedback from their guts of whether they have hunger, and when the hunger is satisfied, rather they're just doing it compulsively. So at the Meadows, I've worked with many of the young women with eating disorders, and it's it really robs people of their lives. But I would do with the group, I would do a kind of exercise like this with the VU and maybe with the jaw if it felt safe enough. And so when you start to feel your guts and begin to know what your guts need, what they want, then you're starting to do it in an organic way. You're allowing your organism to give you those signals of when to eat, when to stop eating, and so forth. But also, you see a lot of trauma with people who have eating disorders. That's very, very common. Actually, there's a book that's coming out that the Meadows is doing, and they've asked me to comment, I think, on 3 different write-ups that people have made. And what I think was most useful is just what I'm saying right now, that when you vibrate it and feel the vibration coming back up the vagus nerve, we'll talk about that again later, and then coming up and then settling. And then how does it feel? Do you feel tingling? Do you feel vibration? Do you feel warmth in your belly? And again, when we are able to connect energetically and emotionally and feeling wise with our body, with our guts, with our viscera, then a lot of the driving forces for eating disorders gets reduced. Clients have told me, when I've worked with some clients with eating disorders, that when they have sex, it makes them want to vomit. And when they vomit, it's like a release. But you don't want the person to have that as the only way to come to release. You really absolutely have to be able to help them come to connection with their guts without bulimia, without overeating, without starvation. All of these things really are related to the vagus dysregulation, and then coming to vagal regulation.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. Thank you. So somebody's asking what to do to do this amazing work with people if they're used to taking benzodiazepines.
Yeah. Whoa. Well, there are times when benzos are helpful. If somebody has had just a crisis and they just need to navigate through life, they have all kinds of things they have to take care of, then the short-term use of benzos can be helpful.
Short-term.
Short-term.
Emphasis short-term.
Yeah. But when it becomes longer term, they are extremely addicting, and they disconnect the person from their self. One of the things that when I started working with many, many people, I would work with them, and they would get to a place, and then things would just like trickle out, dissipate.
And that's true with THC as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, in a way, they should be legal. None of the stuff should be illegal, but people should be guided and given references on the ways to abuse these kind of substances. So anyhow, benzos, it's kind of like you take a benzo and it's like you don't feel anxiety. Well, you don't really feel anything, really. And so it really seems like a great idea. But again, it is tremendously habituating, addicting, and it doesn't allow the person really to take the next step in connecting with themselves. So you may have to work, again, along with the physician, usually it's a psychiatrist that's prescribed it, to help them taper. And you have to do that very gradually, very slowly, very gradually. And, and then people just, it's like the light bulbs got turned on. They start to feel again. So I hope that's useful for you.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you. Rosa is writing in about how do you help a baby after traumatic birth to release the stress as quickly as possible? Or how do you work with a pregnant woman with an attachment injury and complex trauma to be able to bond with her child during pregnancy and after?
Well,
big questions.
Yeah, they're big questions. We have another couple of hours here.
I know.
If I work with somebody who's pregnant, I'm very careful not to work or dredge up new traumatic material, because really their whole focus needs to become to prepare for the birth. But it will help them regulate, of course. And I do work with infants, and I do work with the birth process. I don't really speak much about it, but I'm thinking as an example, a woman who was a client of mine for a short period of time, and really because infertility. And then she became fertile. And actually I was in Colorado and she was in San Francisco. So I got up, and she was in labor for 24 hours. So I got immediately on the plane, flew out, and then I could see she was holding so much in her jaw and her neck. So I basically, with her permission, I just did a little bit of work on the jaw and on the neck, and boom, out popped the baby. And I did some work again with the breath. And then there are other people who also work with infants and babies. The BEBA project, which was Ray Castellino's work, and Eva Reich, Wilhelm Reich's daughter. It's a number of us who have found this really can be tremendously important and even transformable to help the child develop a healthy attachment with the mother and the mother with the child. So to really help them release the held stuck energy and give some additional encouragement or even coaching about the attachment process. And often when I'll work with the parent wants me to work with the baby, what I'll work first is with the mother and the father. And I really support first the father to support the mother, and then the mother to support the mother and father to support the infant. But I think in a way I've learned more about somatic experiencing in working with children and infants because it's so transparent. It's not covered over like it is when we become adults. So so I worked, I don't know how many, but I've certainly worked with a few dozen infants around the time of birth. And actually, again, two of them are children of mine, godsons of mine. And it was just wonderful. One of my godsons just came to visit me. And he just was so wonderful to see what a compassionate human being he became. And I think in some small part, that had to do with the early work that we did together. So yeah, again, it's not an easy subject, it's quite complicated, but really you can, when you're open to working with an infant, you can really help set the stage for really a healthy attachment in here and now attachment.
Beautiful. There's a couple questions about immigrants and child refugees of war, how to help them feel a sense of attachment to a place, a sense of self, a sense of trust and safety when the parents really couldn't protect them from the war.
Well, we're getting plenty of that, I'm afraid.
I know.
Plenty of that. And a number of my students are working in Ukraine, living in Ukraine, or working in the countries surrounding Ukraine and in Switzerland, you know, to help the people and help the children. And Maggie Klein and I, she is the co-author in a couple of our books. And we made a little booklet to help parents and therapists understand the effect of war on the children and things that they can do to help the child. Because the exposure to war is a really bad idea. If you want to create the next generation of people who are traumatized, that's a good way to do it. Yeah, but hopefully you don't want to do that. You really want to be able to help them because they're living in constant fear and loss. Many of them have lost parents, have lost siblings. You know, they need support. They need somebody who's just going to say, you know, I'm with you. I'm here with you. And, you know, and that's the kind of approach I think that's absolutely necessary, to be present with ourselves, because this is not an easy place to be. In me, at my life and my age, I wouldn't choose to be, to be in a place like Ukraine. But I do work with children, and I, of course, work with therapists to help them know how to work with children. But Maggie Klein does a lot of that work. You can check. I think we have her information on my website. I'm not sure, but she does a lot of good work with kids, and she's also an NSC teacher. Absolutely.
There are some questions about secondary trauma, like that someone might experience from hearing about someone else's trauma.
Yeah. Well, yes. You know, and I think I'm thinking when I was working in Colorado, you know, after one of these days where you just were some of the most horrific kinds of things that you can imagine. And so at the end of the day, I would put my feet in the river, and then I would bring some cans that I would have, and I would kick cans down Apple Valley Road. Neighbors would say, oh gosh, that's Dr. Levine again. He must have had a heavy schedule. And then I talk to colleagues and friends, and I suppose there's always the danger of tertiary trauma, but it's important that we have contact with others, that we can be with them and share with them and get reflection from them regarding the trauma that we might be picking up.
Thank you. Terry is also asking about the popularity of psychedelics now and how you feel they help or hinder somatic work.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually saying I'm working on an autobiography, believe it or not. And in one of the chapters, I really bring up the topic of psychedelics. And I call it promises and pitfalls. You know, as being a person, a young man from, you know, in the 60s in Berkeley, obviously I had exposure to a lot of psychedelic drugs. I think they can be very helpful. But if you're just taking the drug and just repeating taking that medicine, which it is, it's a very powerful medicine, it's really losing its effect. And it's essential to prepare people for that kind of a journey. to be there in a supportive way and to be there with somebody who really knows how to administer. Now, again, everybody's doing these short courses, or not everybody, but people are doing these short courses to learn how to work with psychedelics. But it's much more complicated than that. You know, how do you really work with the material that comes up? How do you do follow-up? How do you prepare them, for example, like with MDMA, that they first actually are listening to music and having, you know, the light mask over their eyes, and just doing that for a few hours, for 2 or 3 hours, and work with whatever comes up. Then after the psychedelic administered session, then to follow up and also work with what comes up. But just doing the psychedelics, I think that's one of the pitfalls. But to really prepare for it, there's actually it was on Netflix. I don't think it is there anymore, but you can probably find it somewhere. It's called The Last Shaman. And it's about this young man. His parents really provide for him, you know, his basic needs, but there's not really any warmth and connection. And so he is suffering from a kind of depression. You know, it's one of the kinds of depressions that you don't really, it's not so obvious. It's not like he's suicidally depressed, but he's just depressed. And so he goes seeking the shaman to take ayahuasca, which is again one of the common psychedelics. And so he goes from one shaman to another, and he really is disappointed because by and large, they're in it for the money, they're in it for the power. And finally, in this remote mountain area, he meets who will be the last shaman. And the shaman gives him a ritual to prepare for a month before he takes it. And the boy is practicing them, but he's also in this village with these surrounding of especially wonderful, playful, warm children and warm parents. And that's really, I think, what's really happening. It's not just, or it's not even primarily the ritual, but being in that kind of environment.
Really primed his secure attachment system to show up and start to get activated.
Yeah, prime the pump. And then you see, I mean, it didn't take care of all of his life problems, but you see that he really has made a step forward, that he is able to move forward, that he has much more capacity to be in contact with other people. So I don't know if there's been follow-up from that movie. I should check on that. It's called, again, The Last Shaman.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's see. Joanne is asking about if someone has been sexually abused as a child and then later was sexually engaged with by their therapist. Not a good result. Can the second event change their attachment style? Any second event, major trauma can shift an attachment style a little bit, but you sort of have a default from what your original one was. I mean, attachment styles can shift depending on what the relational field is to some degree. Is there anything you'd like to say about that, Peter?
For that person, I'm just really
it's
so
awful.
Sorry. You know, that's something should never ever happen.
No.
By the way, that's something that has actually happened with some of the psychedelics, where, you know, it really opens people up to their heart, and then they make the misstep that this is then, you know, is open to sexual expression. But it's you really people who are doing therapy, period, and especially psychedelic therapy, they have to be comfortable enough in their own skin, in their own sexuality, so they're not projecting it on the person. And again, that takes some developmental work. It really takes some serious
That's why it's so important for therapists to get their own work and to have good supervision and make sure, you know, we're human beings too. We have a lot of things to clean up ourselves. So to get the support to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Diane. Yeah, so it's really a matter of when we're there, we're really with the person, and we're with the person in a clean way. And we don't confuse our own erotic impulse. That is something that absolutely has to be contained, but we don't want to deny it, but we also need absolutely to contain it so it doesn't spread.
And have strong boundaries around it for the
Strong
client and for
boundaries.
yourself. Yes. Very
Absolutely.
clear, strong boundaries.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A few people are asking about complex trauma and working with disorganized attachment that so often go together.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Working with difficult emotions is one thing, but working with conflicting emotions at the sort of almost at the same time is much more difficult.
Yes.
And it takes, again, art and practice to, to do that, to work that way with a person. Yeah.
And thank you. And Alan is asking about if you could say a little bit more about the freeze response in contrast. Obviously, well, there's also fight and flight, but those are more action oriented. Freeze is more shutdown, but he'd like you to say a little bit more about that. And then the new one is fawning, which is a little bit of this habit of placating or, trying to get out of violent behavior or get out of an attack by placating, and then that becoming kind of a people pleasing pattern into adult life.
Exactly. This really kind of people thinking about this started to come with what was called the Stockholm Syndrome. And this was a group of people who were kidnapped, and basically they fell in love with their captors. There's also the story of Patty Hearst, who was kidnapped by the SRA. And I think that they were actually somewhat unfair to her because, again, she exhibited something very much like the Stockholm Syndrome. But really what's underneath the Stockholm Syndrome is what's called the fawning response. So you kind of try to make towards a connection with the person who's the
perpetrator or person in power that's abusing it. Yeah.
Yeah, the perpetrator is the word I'm looking for. So they really often really blame themselves for doing that and feel really like they've shamed themselves or humiliated themselves. So again, you have to work with that. And there was an example, I forget which one it was, about working with the shame posture, and also to help the person normalize it. Like anything, any defensive reaction, it saved your life. How do you know that? Well, because you're here together with me right now. And that wouldn't have happened, if you hadn't done the right thing. Whether it's fleeing, fighting, freezing, collapsing, or fawning. It's a funny term, but again, the idea is that we do what we need to do to survive, or to survive parts of ourselves, and to keep some sense of wholeness in ourselves. So again, I just say, whatever you did, whatever your defense mechanisms were, we want to celebrate them. And let's see if we can go a little further with this and go more into connection with your inner feelings of self. And
one person's asking if you ask someone to do, like an exercise or the running response, and they say no. And obviously we talked about if you hit resistance, say, excuse me, you're just honoring it and looking for another window. But is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that resistance is a very powerful force to be harnessed. There's a reason why, I don't even use the word resistant, but there's a reason why the person is, quotations, is resistant. There's a reason for that. And the resistance is taking us closer to that, to what the resistance was resisting. So then it opens the possibility of working what's underneath the resistance. So resistance is really an indication that you're going in the right direction.
It's important information to unpack.
Yeah, it's very important information. I mean, again, there are situations where, you might not be fully attuned to, what the people are experiencing when there's resistance, so-called resistance. But again, really, if you work with that and just touch into it, not go into the resistance, but just touch the resistance, see what's going on there, and see what important information there is, what important experience there is that's being defended against. So it's not just getting rid of the defending, but it's really looking at the reason for the defense.
The beauty of your work and this way of doing inquiry is that you can track anything. You can really try to unpack whatever's going on for someone, and it usually goes in a useful direction as long as you're in attunement and alignment with what's arising in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
It's not a formula, like so often there's modalities that are more formulaic, and maybe in some cases they're very helpful. But I don't know why I call it this, but I always call this way of working third wave therapy, like where you have to be present as a facilitator in the moment to help the client stay present to the moment, to really moving organically and spontaneously to what needs to happen next. But it's not something you impose of like step by step. And I think it's a really, like you said, practice is so useful in understanding how to work that way.
Yeah, and again, having frameworks that that also guide you. I really like to call it, what was it, third wave therapy, something like that. And again, what we're looking for almost in all cases is what is organic, what is emerging in the person's experience. And to be there to witness it, to support it, to guide the person, but it is not to fix them,
right?
Not to help them change their thoughts or deny any emotions. It really is to help the person unfold into the here and now self.
And that experience, all of us can think about this when you feel like someone really gets you, you feel felt or gotten, and somebody's in a deep process with you, especially with something that's painful and disturbing and uncomfortable. It's just worth $1 million. It's so important, that aha moment. And it's so precious. If you think about your most important relationships, there's usually a capacity for the accurate reflection and empathy. And Peter demonstrating in these clips of being the empathetic other, but also very highly attuned to the shifts and being able to reflect them, and the person feeling seen and getting it, that Peter gets them on that level, how much that moves that forward. And you're going to see so much more of that in the demos as we show the whole thing and seeing how it unfolds just spontaneously and beautifully in the direction of healing and transformation. So that's what we have waiting for you. If you feel like you'd like to join us, I do want to emphasize it will help you a lot in terms of understanding and absorbing the course if you do decide to come on the journey with us, which we hope you will, to really take the time to look at the basic principles of somatic experiencing. It's a video that's a little over 2.5 hours long. You can watch it in segments when you have the time. And there's also an article that Peter wrote called Introduction to Somatic Experiencing that will help familiarize you with the language and the intention. And we're also going to be showing you specific exercises that Peter's using. And as each week opens up, you'll have a complete description of why he does this exercise, how to facilitate it, what the goal of it is, what its therapeutic benefit is. So there's just tons of rich information that we'd like to share with you beyond the time we have today. But I am so happy that you joined us today. Thank you so much for the privilege of sharing your time, and also to have this time with Peter. So is there anything else you'd like to say in closing, Peter? We're going to be needing to wrap up soon.
Of course, you're seeing use of tools and so forth, but to really learn this work, it's important to at least take some of the SE training, some of the somatic experiencing training. It really can make a big difference, not only in your work, but in your lives.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate your time and attention, and we're excited to take this a lot deeper and a lot further as we come together for the class coming up very soon in February. So we'll see you soon, hopefully. And in any event, we're just really glad you joined us today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye for now.
Appreciate you being here. Yeah. And you, Diane. And
happy to be here. It's always a pleasure, Peter. It's really fun. I always love having time with you.
Yeah. Okay. So the beat goes on. Okay.
Bye for now. Thanks, everybody.